Thank you very much, Sophie. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome again on the Lengow Day event. I am Cyril du Plessis, and I'm going to manage this roundtable about the circular economy and more specifically about the circular e-commerce. Two quick words about me. I am 44. I've been working in the digital from up to 20 years, and I am the host of the podcast for e-commerce leaders, the digital doers. So the main question of the day is, what is the circular e-commerce? Which initiatives are being introduced? Probably you have some example in mind, like Patagonia, Pack Market, or Vestiaire Collective. To go in the details, we are lucky today because we have three nice personalities around this virtual roundtable. The first one is Vigga Svensson, CEO at Continued Fashion, the world's first white label platform for circular retail in the fashion world. Vigga is a sustainable fashion expert, public speaker, and award-winning serial entrepreneur specialized in innovative business model based on circular economy. Also, we have Stéphanie Crespin, circular fashion and second-hand luxury expert, founder and CEO of Reflaunt.com and StyleTribute.com. Stéphanie brings to the luxury fashion industry innovative technologies and tools that enable leading brands to embrace the circular economy trend. And also we have Ben Whitaker from Circular, founder of Circular, a global secondary market expert through Leader, who was recently launched his new company, Circular, providing e-commerce optimization solutions to retailers, brand and brand owners. So, Vigga, could you introduce yourself a little bit more in details than I did and share with us, according to you, the definition of circular e-commerce?
Yes, so my name is Vigga Svensson. As you mentioned, I've been an entrepreneur in the fashion industry for the past almost 20 years, focusing all the way along on sustainability, and for the past 7-8 years, especially on new business model based on circular economy, circular retail, or circular e-commerce, you could say. And what we try to do in our company is to help brands introduce new business models and new way of offering their products to the consumers. We think it's very interesting to focus on the consumer models rather on the supply chain when we talk about sustainability, because we can see, based on many researches and LCAs and things like that, then the way to create true impact in the fashion industry and in consumption in general is to focus on the consumer models and change them. So this is what we try to help the brands do in a low risk, easy way. So for me, circular e-commerce is well, it's basically two circles, you could say. So it's one circle where one product is shared between many consumers in a systemic setup, and it's a material circle, a material loop, where an infrastructure, which would normally be a technical infrastructure, creates an opportunity to collect the products after use and recycle them.
Okay, so thanks very much for your introduction. Also, the first answer about circular economy. The question is now for you, Stéphanie. Can you introduce yourself and answer the question? What is the circular economy for you?
Yes. So I'm Stéphanie Crespin. I'm initially based in Singapore. I started my entrepreneurial journey around 8 years ago, and started my first venture called StyleTribute, which is a luxury secondhand marketplace. and building this first startup and secondhand marketplace and being immersed in circularity, I started a second company called Reflaunt. And Reflaunt is born out of all the experience and insights that I've collected through Style Tribute, and that facilitates or empowers brands and retailers to embrace circularity and to integrate within their business model a resale service. So very concretely, through Reflaunt, you can shop with a brand. 6 months later, you want to put back on sale your bag. You go back to the brand's e-commerce, and next to it, you have a resell button. Once you resell and push that resell button, it gets listed across a network of marketplaces across the globe, and you finally get the choice between being paid in cash or shopping credits. So I really moved from a B2C company, peer-to-peer marketplace, to a company where we accompany the brands, retailers in the first-hand industry to integrate within our traditional linear model, circularity and secondhand. So what is circular e-commerce? I think Vigga's definition was really good, so I'm going to be try to be shorter, but so for me, it's an e-commerce that facilitates repurposing of past purchases through different models. That could be the rental, that could be the recycling or upcycling, that can be the resell or the swapping, and basically that promotes the extension of product life cycle through these models or through these services.
Thank you very much, Stéphanie, for your introduction and the definition of e-commerce. Ben, this is for you now. Can you introduce yourself and tell us what is your definition of circular e-commerce?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Whitaker. I'm the founder of a startup called Circular.com. More recently, I was the EMEA director for the world's largest B2B re-commerce business, a company called Bstock, who are a Silicon Valley based company that organized large-scale liquidation auctions for retailers, manufacturers, and distributors. So it's a B2B environment that I've come from. My experience in e-commerce is pretty similar to everybody else, in that I've been in and around e-commerce for around 20 years, in various modes, but mostly around the secondary market. And I've seen significant changes in the way that businesses have operated, scaled up, and how they're starting to be impacted by external factors that are making them look at sustainability in a way that they probably weren't having to before. And I'm a firm believer that if we weren't in the current situation we were in with the COVID, that actually sustainability would be absolutely top of every retailer's agenda at the moment. And I think that there are an awful lot of opportunities to help businesses to be less impactful in the way that they operate, and Circular is going to help them to do that.
Okay, thanks, Ben, for this short introduction. As you said, circular economy is more than a trend. This is something which is quite new in the economy. I mean, new, not really new, but more and more used by the brands and by the retailers. In France, we can see a lot of examples about brands that are moving on second-hand offer. Let's speak about Jacadi or Cyrilus for kids fashion. They now offer to the customers the way to buy second-hand clothes. We also can see Fnac Darty. In introduction, I was speaking about Back Market, which is a big player, but this is a new player, a new startup, and from the beginning, his business is built up on circular business. How do you see the traditional brands taking over the circular economy, moving on it? Is that just a trend, and they want to like for sustainability, they want to show to the customer that they are compliant with this kind of expectations from the customer? How do you feel this move from traditional brands moving step by step to something new, second-hand offer? Vigga, do you have an idea about that, or do you want to say something?
Absolutely. Yes. So I think before Corona hit the world earlier this year, I think that we did see a lot of brands in the fashion industry already focusing a lot on circular e-commerce, but as you say, very much as a marketing story, because it's just a nice story to tell. And then during the Corona, we just something changed, and now I think it's more a matter of actually not a nice story, but it's a matter of risk management, because what we saw in Corona was a very fundamental problem about product value for the brands. So because the world shut down, just as you were about to send all your spring summer products into the shops and retailers all around the world, it meant that all the brands they ended up having a lot of inventory with brand new clothing, but at no value at all, because the window for it had passed. So now we can see that there's a fundamental need for new business models, and it's born out of risk management and not from a marketing perspective. So what we do see now is that maybe this is not when we speak to brands, we do not speak to the marketing director any longer. We speak to the CEO, because this is actually a strategic matter, and I think that's perfect. So we saw the evolution in who we are talking to is interesting, because 2 years ago we spoke to the CSR manager. 1 year ago we spoke to the marketing manager or head of marketing, and now we speak to the CEO. So you can actually tell a lot from that evolution in regards of circular e-commerce and the future of circular e-commerce. So it's actually getting serious, which I think is great. But it's born out of pandemic situation.
And according to you, the CEOs are really aware about this new, let's say, mindset about circular economy. Do you need to convince them about the added value of this model?
Of course, the level of matureness is differs from brand to brand, of course, and CEO to CEO. But so I do see a acknowledgement of the need of new business models, and that there's an acknowledgement of the fact that the industry is too vulnerable at the moment, because the window for you to sell your products at full pricing is is getting shorter and shorter, and the timing. I mean, we need so few incidents in order to fuck that timing up and eventually create a catastrophe for the brand, because you end up having a lot of inventory at no value at all. So there's definitely an understanding of that problem. But what we also see is that there's no understanding of how to run a circular business model. The metrics in the business model is very difficult for brands to understand, and they do have a feeling that or they are very afraid of introducing this in their sales channels, because they have a feeling that it's taking money from, it's cannibalizing the existing sales channels, which is but that's a huge concern among the brands. So they understand why it's necessary, because they have felt it on their own body during the Corona time, but they have no idea about the metrics and the business and the nature of circular e-commerce. So this is definitely what we need to around this table, what we need to help them understand.
Okay, that's super clear, Stéphanie. I was seeing you moving your head. How do you, how do you see how do you see that, and how do you see the traditional, let's say, traditional brands trying to move? They don't fully move yet, but they try to move on a new way, on a new business model with more sustainability, more second hand and circular economy. How do you see that?
Yeah. Before answering that, I just want to bounce back on what Vigga was saying at the end. I really think that now, sustainability and circularity we're past that time, right? Everyone is convinced that we need to do it. So it's not a matter anymore of convincing certain departments and making sure that the projects get seen by the right people. It's top of the agenda of all companies, right? At least in the fashion industry, and I can agree and repeat what Vigga was saying, is that this year we're talking to the key executives at a strategic level of companies. But what's interesting right now is much more, and what's much more key is the challenge that these companies have and that the industry has to embrace and integrate these new models, right? Because the whole infrastructure, the whole supply chain was based on a traditional linear business model. So it impacts every piece of the value chain, right? It impacts, your infrastructure and your logistics. It impacts your sales and your marketing, because suddenly your customer journey doesn't end at the moment where people have purchased the item and have been delivered. No, it continues, it's extended. So how do you integrate that piece in your whole marketing and communication strategy? So it's interesting to see how different brands are coping with that. I think the logistical part is probably the most intense one and the most problematic, because when you look at resale, there is a lot of challenges around building a scalable logistics around enabling and facilitating your customers to resell their pieces. So that's the real challenge, I think, is what Vigga was saying, is not convincing them, is how to incorporate it at every step of your value chain. Now, this being said, the way that I see it is that what's interesting with circularity is that while you have many sustainable initiatives or green initiatives that we've had in the past, these almost have there's almost a negative connotation to it, because often, and sometimes not often, but part of the times, it didn't make sense financially or economically. from a circular perspective or circular models make sense economically and financially. And this is what is amazing, is that there's no trade-off to be done between your sustainability goals and targets and your economical or financial goals, right? Because if you look at circularity, you're able to capture a new market audience. You're able to create loyalty. You're able to drive economies of waste of resources. So it opens up a whole new world of economical opportunities that we didn't have before. So that's what I think is really interesting. And that's why it's gaining so much momentum versus other initiatives that are much more long-term and financially heavy. Building in a circular model within your existing and traditional business makes total financial sense, right?
Okay, that's super clear. And Ben, Stéphanie was speaking about the operations, and the operations are key because you need to think in another way to execute your business. How do you see that in yourself? Because in circular, you are really concretely doing operations. You expect to do reverse logistic in another way. If I understood correctly, your value proposition. How do you see that?
I think you have to start from the premise that retail is an inherently forward-looking operation, and the space that we all operate in tends to be in the space what I call past the order button, or almost past the certainly where you're dealing with returns, or you're at a point where you're past the order button. You're at the point where the customer is cancelled, and then you've got to figure out what's going to happen with that with that product. So it depends. There are various challenges, and I think that probably the biggest one at the moment is, and I concur with a lot of what's just been said, but I'm going to push back on a little bit, and I think that operationally, businesses are still very, very challenged about how to actually make a meaningful contribution towards sustainability. They know that they're being scrutinized on it, but many of them actually lack the internal knowledge to actually know how to take that first step. And when you look at a business which has been around, and I'm going to step away from the apparel business because I've got two panel experts on here, and I'm not going to try and get involved in that one too much. But you've got an inherent problem in terms of reverse engineering processes to actually make them now become more circular. And as much as we'd like to be able to have a business which completely does less damage, whichever way around you manage it, these businesses have still got to make money in the interim. There's no point being sustainable and broke, right? Because as a brand, you want to move forward. You want to engage with new customers. You want to take them on that journey with you. But equally, you've got to stay trading. And the bigger the organisation, I think there's a saying, big ships turn slowly, right? And the larger the organisation, the more difficult it is to actually put that whole thing into play in a meaningful way to make it actually make a difference. And I think when you look in the apparel industry, clearly there are different ends of the spectrum. You've got the high-end luxury brands who actually, when you stand back, they're relatively low unit production on an annualized basis. You go to the other end of the scale and you look at the fast fashion guys who are running tens of thousands of SKUs that they're refreshing often on a daily, weekly basis on really, really short runs. And they all sit in the apparel in the fashion industry with completely different sets of challenges, right? And I think that when you look at that and you start to think, how long have these businesses been around? What space are they in? What countries are they selling in? How are they sourcing? How are they designing? And how do they then start to change that? It's a big challenge, big challenge. And I think it's really important that we don't beat retailers with a stick too quickly, because for some of them, it's about taking them on a journey. And I hate to throw a cliche out there, but every journey starts with the first step, right? And sometimes, it's actually about saying, well, look, this may be where you want to be in 10 years' time. But thinking about what we're going to do in the next quarter, what we're going to do in the next 6 months, what we're going to do in the next year. How do we start to re-envisage that? Because you can't just switch from one model to another. But it's a great space, and I think to the point that was made earlier on, it's a good news story. And I don't know a retailer out there that doesn't want to go out there and say, we recognize the problem, we understand the problem, we've got a plan. And you know what? You'll be able to see us, and you can come with us on that journey over time. So there's lots to do, right?
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. And we spoke about where we can address the markets. Our brands, retailers, has to embrace the circular economy, and that's a key point, of course. But they can do it because there are markets. And I would like to speak about the consumers and how we can see with the consumer's point of view, how they see the circular economy. What are their expectations in terms of need, in terms of perception of the market? Vigga, how do you see that?
So I see it like this. So the consumers are already doing this big time. I mean, we have seen for the past 10 years the secondhand market exploding, and at the same time also the generation Instagram exploding, and so we have consumers that are used to changing ownership of products. No problem about that. It's already there, the behavior on the secondhand market. And we also have consumers that need new clothes all the time in order to, the Instagram generation, in order to create content and value on social medias. So the consumers are already doing the circular e-commerce big time. I'm not sure they are very aware of it, but they are doing it already. It's not like a huge cultural shift we need in the consumer segments, not at all, especially, of course, not the younger generations. So for the consumers, this is just great news, because they have been doing this for a long time, but facilitated on the secondhand market and secondhand platforms. And now we are actually moving into a new era where this, because what is interesting is that for the past 10 years, where the secondhand market has been growing very fast, at the same time, the brands have been moving away from the consumers more and more. And today, the distance between brands and consumers are very big. There's a huge gap there. And it's crazy because today the brands, they have no idea about how the consumer uses their products. They have no idea about what happens with their products when it's sold. Not at all. So the interesting things, and here I talk about the fashion culture, the interesting things happens in the triangle between the consumers, the secondhand platforms, and the social medias, and not between the brands and the consumers. So, of course, we need to help the brands into that triangle and become part of the culture again, which they were back in the days, but they are no longer. So I think that the consumers are already doing this big time, as I said, and for them it's just good news that now this way of behavior will actually be reflected in the brand's sales channels as well.
And do you see a segmentations? I mean, you are speaking about the young generation and the Instagram generation, but for people who are oldest, I mean, because when you are more than 40, probably your behaviors are not exactly the same than people between 20 and 30. And on the market, do you think the needs and the way the consumers see the circular offers are the same segment by segment, or because you were speaking
not
about
at
the
all.
easy consumer? Yeah, tell us.
I'm speaking about the younger consumer segments, which is super interesting because it's a huge consumer group. But of course, the older segments is very important as well. And I think that they have, of course, a different behavior pattern, definitely. But it goes for them as well that there's this problem that the brands, they don't know how to actually be relevant in their lives. I'm 48, and I don't think that any brands know how to be relevant for me, actually, because they have no idea about how I use their clothes. And that's a problem, in all age groups. My behavior is different than my kids' behavior, definitely, when it comes to fashion consumption. So for me, it's much more to do about, it's about services. It's about having a way of consuming that makes it easy for me, that is relevant for me. So I mean, the narrative and the selling points will be different for me, of course, than for my kids, because the dynamics for me as a fashion consumer are different. But it's still super relevant, but more focused on the service side of it. That's at least our experience, because we do work with brands for younger segments, but also for older segments. So we do have some experience.
Okay, cool. That's really interesting. And Stéphanie, according to you, how do you see the markets?
Yeah, I think, 12 years ago, we assisted to the emergence of companies like Airbnb. So companies in the shared economy, right? And I think circularity, rental, secondhand is shared economy based models, kind of. So fashion was inspired to that. And what we see in regards cross industry is it's really driven as well by an optimization of our wallets and of our usage, right? Resell captures that idea that when you buy something, you will be able to resell it at a certain moment and capture the residual value of that item, right? So you're optimizing basically your use out of that product. So financially and economically, that makes a lot of sense for customers. And I think that, this will only accelerate and continue on growing, because that's how we consume today, our vacations, our taxis, our bicycles, but also fashion. There will be different models coexisting, swapping, resell, rental. But I think that will be there to stay. Now, as Vigga was saying, is that now and the years to come, it's the first year where it's really integrated in also the first-hand shopping, right? It's not working in silos. It's not a separate market. You don't go, before you went to buy something, the same customer went to purchase its Chanel bag, and then 6 months later or 6 years later, he sold it back on another marketplace, right? So we're talking about the same customer and the same product going through two complete different experiences. What I think is tomorrow, we will have one seamless integrated experience. And this is what we call circularity, right? So it's connecting those two worlds into one. And I think that's what, the brands and retailers want to capture, is they still want that to happen within their brand experience and within, their brand ecosystem. So that's what we're working on with Reflaunt. Now the second thing as well that Vigga was mentioning was around, I think, the customer understanding and the consumer and the understanding, which is, it's very interesting. So before you went in a shop, you purchased your item, but the moment you were out that door, the brand or retailer didn't know how you interacted with that product, how many uses you had with that product, after how long did you give it to your little sister. And with circularity and with these different models, you start having technologies that allow traceability and that allow the brands and retailers to build insights and much more customer understanding around how people are using and interacting with their own brands. So that's, I think, is super powerful. And we see it, with Reflaunt, when we talk with brands and retailers, part of our product is a dashboard that allows them to see, well, how their own customers are reselling. So what's the resale activity? Who are the customers that are buying secondhand? So it's potentially, the aspirational kind of customers that could become loyal in the future to that brand, right? But today can't afford it. And then the third kind of data that we're collecting is the retention and loyalty. Once those first-hand customers resell that item, do they take cash? Do they take shopping credits? Do they purchase again with their brand? How are the interactions, right? And what is the communication all about? So that opportunity to communicate again with their customers is very powerful through the narrative of, secondhand, product life extension. And that's what, is I think, is where brands have stars in their eyes when we start talking about resale.
That's really, really interesting, because we can see that the distance Vigga was speaking about between the brands and the consumers is something really concrete. Ben, according to you, how do you describe the market needs or the market approach or the consumer needs with the circular economy? We understood with thanks Vigga and Stéphanie that the consumers were already using and really comfortable with the circular approach. According to you, how do you see that?
I think it's worth remembering that marketplaces like eBay, I think, have just turned 25 this month. They are a prime example of a consumer-to-consumer marketplace where people have finished using a product and want to resell it onto another. There's a lot of new products, obviously, on eBay, but eBay's origins are in the secondary market, and I think that to Vigga's point, this is an extension of something that's been going on for years and years and years. Just technology has enabled different solutions and different ways to approach it and envisaging it. I was interested to listen to the comments about the gap between consumer and the brand in the fashion industry, and I'm going to say that I think that's probably specific to that industry because there's no electronics in it. Because if you look at the IoT phenomena, with this connected system of data flowing backwards and forwards, you could argue that certainly in the consumer electronics space and in the sharing economy to a certain extent, that brands have never known more about their consumers, and that some of the kickback, certainly in Europe, has been around GDPR, and people having almost too much information about what the user's doing with the product. So I think that brand gap is something that's nuanced. If I just wanted to move on, the other thing that I was struck by is how are we going to encourage businesses to be more circular? Well, there are two elements to it that I think that we're going to touch on, and I just want to focus on the operational side of this for a second, and I think that this is true of most categories. That's one of the biggest phenomena that's driven e-commerce has been an expectation of a fast and free delivery service. And we've educated the Instagram generation to say, hey, look, not only can you get this and you can look like this, but you can have this product tomorrow. And that specific promise that's made from the vendor to the consumer, and the fact that it's a fast and it's free, I think is at the cause of an awful lot of problems, because you've got to have the stock, you've got to have the choice, you've got to be able to get it there in the fastest amount of time. And I know, by the way, if you don't like it, you can just send it back, it's fine. But unfortunately, fast and free is anything but free. You know, just because the consumer isn't paying for it with cash, they're paying for it somewhere else. You know, it's inbuilt into the prices in the products. It's inbuilt into the impact of having all these different logistical systems in place. And I think if we want to start to address how businesses and the e-commerce space can become more circular, by all means, we should be looking at re-commerce. You know, re-commerce is a fundamental play. But I do think that we need to start to look at how we re-educate a generation of buyers that have been brought upon fast and free. And I think that we also then start to think about how we create these products in the first place. Because, you know, if I take Apple as an example, I think iPhones tend to now have 4 users before they're actually dead. You know, Apple, for all of the criticism that they get for the size of the business that they are, you know, they're very good at actually recycling products, and that because of the value of the products, people use them, and then there's an inherent value in them, and somebody else wants to buy it. That's great, you know, because you're using that product until, in effect, the latent can't think of the word. The latent redundancy of the technology becomes to the point where the product physically doesn't work anymore. You know, so there's there are so many ways to approach this, and I think that we've got to start with how we educate the buyers. Then we've got to think about how we get the products to them, why their expectations are what they are, and then what happens when they don't want it.
Yeah. Ben, can I?
Okay. Yeah, Stéphanie.
I find it's interesting to see how circularity will also have an impact on the quality of products, right? Because as of the moment where you educate customers, or not educate because they're educated on that, but they start really integrating the resale part in the way that they shop, then they're much better off, and they'll do the calculation very quickly by buying something that is worthwhile, that will stand the test of time, versus an item that has no value on the secondary market, right? And I think it's interesting that you take Apple. I'm a bit more I'm part of those that criticize it because I have the impression that my products don't stand the test of time, but you know that much more than I do. But I think circularity and secondhand will push brands and retailers to take the responsibility of the quality of their items. And those that are able to put on the market products that last will be rewarded by market share, because consumers will be drawn to those items that they know when they resell will have a certain value. You don't resell fast fashion. I mean, you do, but then what do you get out of it? You know, a few dollars and so much pain to go around and reselling it.
Yeah, that's right. And you resell Zara clothes on Vinted for a couple of euros. It's not the same story. Yes, Vigga.
But I think it's very interesting what we're talking about now, because I mean, the key to success in circular e-commerce is to understand the perception of value. So this is something that the brands they have no clue about today, because for them value is a much more simple profit calculation rather than the long-term relevance, to understand how to create a long-term relevance, and by that create a long-term profit on a product. So the value perception is super interesting. And as you say, Stephanie, fast fashion we have no great value perception on fast fashion, simply because the brands themselves, the fast fashion brands, they have no they do not treat their own product with great value as well. I mean, because it's just, if you walk into a shop during sales, you can see how disrespectful brands are treating their own products. It's crazy. And I mean, of course, the consumer behavior reflects that as well. And that's not a brick in the success of a circular e-commerce business at all. On the contrary. So understanding how to create a value perception that can actually exist for a long time is very interesting. And that's why it's so difficult for brands to actually just integrate this in the existing business models, because this is the opposite of what they do today. And so that's really interesting. And what we also see, that the industry itself has a lot of myths. And one myth is that a product can only be relevant for 26 weeks, because then that's like the cycle of the fashion industry, especially in the fast fashion. But if you look at what is happening on the secondhand market, the products that are actually performing very well, they are typically much older than 26 weeks. So there's a whole other value perception and opportunity that the brands have no idea about today, which is, I think, one of the key things to create success in circular e-commerce.
If I can just come back, Cyril, if I can just come back on a couple of things.
I'm going to leave you the word of the end, because we have spent all the time almost. So Ben, yes.
Wow.
What do you want to say?
I was just going to touch on the fact that I think luxury's got a real problem in fashion, because when you take the circular perspective about least waste, greatest value, highest usage, luxury products by definition are not essentials. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how luxury is going to reposition itself going forward, and how it's going to stay relevant to a new cohort of buyers that come through. I think that's a great thing to look at. I think the other thing that I just wanted to touch on was the comment about remarketing fast fashion. I'm actually going to completely disagree with that, because I think that when you remarket fast fashion, you're selling that product to a buyer that's probably looking for function over form. And if you've got, when you look at a portion of the market which probably isn't as affluent as, or certainly not as affluent as the luxury market, they're buying for value. And if they can buy a pair of trousers or a shirt or something for the kids, which is cost effective and is going to last for a while, then I think there's a great opportunity in there to reach an audience who would like to who have aspirations and would like to buy something as fashionable as they can, but actually are limited by value. And you can discount that. You can discount that market. I think you discount that market at your peril, to be honest.
I think that the point was, I don't know if it was what Vigga was saying or myself, but was more around the condition, right? Items that keep their condition. It's not one wear that they're, they shrunk, they lost their color. Yeah. Those items will not, or those products and those brands that promote those items will not be rewarded in a world where circularity and residual value after one wear to wear is important. That was, I think, the major point.
Okay, thank you very much, Stéphanie. Thank you very much, Vigga, and thank you very much, Ben. I hope all of you who are listening and watching us, you spent a good time and you understand a little bit better what circular e-commerce is. We have a really good time. Thanks again for your time. Thank you very much, Lengow, for this initiative. And I hope we will see you soon in real life. Thank you very much.